the Amazonia, pledge our loyalty. Praise the soul of Savior who granted us the freedom. Our legends to the hero, for God alone we gather. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in a nation, flowing with and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father, for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Amazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meet in our need, and your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God be the watchman of this nation. Amazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meet in our need, and your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God be the watchman of this nation.
Oh, na place there. Oh, na place there. My fellow people, I am grateful you are hanging around as usual to listen to me. So I'll start with something that was spoken of by Theodore Roosevelt, and I have written about this before. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. I call you the bravest people on earth, not because of your achievements, but because you have risen from a place of chaos, deception, manipulation, and an environment deliberately created to make you a dependent, to the heights of resilience, continuous resistance, and hope against all odds. You come from a background where you were reduced to nothing. Your existence depended solely on the goodwill of your butchers and the barbarians who occupy your land. Your dignity, your name, your conscience, your thought processes depended solely on how Cameroon wanted you to act. You have emerged from that state to a state within a period of 7 years where you are a subject of international discussions. You have become an actor considered not by only your butchers, but an international community that never even knew you existed to be spoken to. You never sometimes sit and quantify the achievements, the strides you have made in 7 years. The barbarians, the enablers, and the spoilers want you to focus on the limitations, on the shortcomings, on the difficulties. They do not want you to look back and see how far we have come as a people and how treacherous it would be to those who have fallen, to those in jail, to the families who've lost loved ones, if we take just one step back in contemplation, in resignation, in doubt of our prowess, our achievement, in total abuse of the sacrifices of the men and women still wielding the bayonet. I say to you today, with all certainty, without an iota of doubt, you are a free people. You will own the state of Ambazonia, independent and sovereign. That is not a subject of discussion, of negotiation. We can talk about different issues, how many enemies we want to take out, how we want to take them out. We might disagree on the level of armaments that we need. But the question of your independence and freedom from the tyranny of the butchers who've held you in servitude for more than 6 decades is not a subject for discussion. And so time and again, I present myself to you as a servant. And I want you to take what I do seriously. The last 60 years of occupation has been orchestrated through a combination of methods. The first instruments of colonization or deception, persistent deception and manipulation, historical revision, near hijack of the narrative. Every leader, from the prime ministers or heads of governments of Amazonia, were manipulated. They didn't have the right to respond. They allowed the enemy to control the narrative. They hoped simply that the justness of their cause was enough to undermine the brutality and narrative of the occupier. You may not understand the role I play today because you are coming from a place of desperation and you are on the pedestal of hope. You want to see the end come as quickly as possible. My role is to keep you woke, is to constantly remind you of the sacred obligation to the men and women in jail, dead, and in the bushes, to constantly deconstruct the narrative of the enemy, expose you to the truth, historical facts, which are the most lethal weapon you will need to survive. You might lose a war. You might lose an armed resistance. But as long as you do not lose your mental liberation, you can restart the war. In the past 2 years, Cameroon has engaged in persistent and systematic narrative construction, fronting Amazonians as their mouthpiece. They look alike, you know them. They should be for you, stand for you. And so if they speak for the enemy, then there should be something they are saying we must listen to. From 1961, they fronted the Funchas and the Munas. They recruited thousands and thousands of elites, the grandparents of some of the enablers who run havoc on our streets today. They became the middlemen and women who interceded between us and our butchers. They fed us with tales. They demonized those who spoke truth to power, who rose up and asked for something better than we are having. They became the unelected, unofficial spokespeople who represented us as slaves in the house of the slave takers. Anyone who rose up was either killed, jailed, or exported into exile. Those who resisted for a while were integrated into the system of occupation and asked to conform or face the same fate as their forebears. Most succumbed until we came to town. Our posture has been described as intransigence, extreme, brutal. They've called us all names that they could hatch as adjectives: kidnappers, They have described us as aliens coming from a place nobody has ever been, to break our resistance, to weaken our resolve, to make us begin to question our own intellectual ability and to question an outcome which is already certain. None of them has been able to continuously articulate the fact that the suffering our people are going through is as a result of the occupation, and that the Calais that have harassed and tortured our people has not stopped. They have not realized that the IGPs created was not because we rose up in arms, and that the economic strangulation we have been through for the past 60 years has created economic IDPs, refugees, and that the mental torture, the degradation that we have been going through has made thousands upon thousands of our people to escape. And that the flight into Biafra, into Nigeria, into the United States, into Europe didn't start in the last 7 years. They have insisted through the killing of commanders, summary execution of young men, burning of homes, checkpoints of robbery and extortion, propagandists, that we will either succumb or be destroyed. My fellow people, our struggle is a struggle far bigger than any one of us. Our struggle is one that captures the collective pain of a people. Our struggle is against a system that has transformed our society from a tranquil place of cohesion and hope into one of chaos, despondency, and hopelessness. And that this struggle is not simply limited to the desire of an independent state, but far more focus on the issues of education, respect for human rights, respect for our tradition, economic opportunities, hope for our people, being citizens of a country where you can be proud of, the right to vote, to be voted into office, to hold any position based on merit, and most importantly, not to be treated as a stranger in your own country. For 63 years, a section of our society has made the determination that we must end Cameroon's occupation. A small minority paid by Cameroon, hired by Cameroon, sometimes supported by external actors, have insisted through violence and manipulation that we must remain as slaves. My role as your leader is to make sure that that never happens, and that you must become the sole owners of your country, and you must be in a place to determine the future of our country. Today, I want to talk about three things. and I will go straight into them. In 2020, Dr. Akwanga declared a unilateral ceasefire. A unilateral ceasefire is a cessation of hostilities by one party in a conflict. We are aware that during the COVID-19 period, the United Nations orchestrated a scheme that could be used to reduce the effect of ongoing wars, to create the environment for the pandemic to be dealt with. In the Philippines, the Filipino government declared a unilateral ceasefire. In Amazonia, Dr. Akwanga declared a unilateral ceasefire. Now, during that period, I made a speech and I explained detailedly why a unilateral ceasefire is not for the interest of Amazonia. That this is not a border conflict. It's not a conflict with another state for a stretch of land between the two states. It was a war being fought within the territory of Amazonia. It was a war declared on Amazonia by the state of Cameroon that continues to occupy our land. And that the primary reason why we took up arms was first to defend our people and to protect them from the scorched earth policies of Cameroon. It was not primarily for the liberation. After teachers and lawyers were massacred, helicopter gunships were used against peaceful demonstrators in Boya. After bodies were found in the bushes. After 60 years of these approaches, where students are murdered for taking part in peaceful demonstrations, people are kidnapped and deported from the common law system into the civil law system, it was necessary for Amazonians to arm themselves to protect our people and our villages. And to declare a unilateral ceasefire against a genocidal regime, one that has demonstrated that you do not need to be armed to be murdered, one that has shown that it can kill students for taking part in peaceful demonstrations, was not only unwise, but was almost a sabotage, was almost a surrender. Ceasefires are sometimes a declaration of intent, measures of confidence building by parties in a conflict. And depending on the nature of the conflict, ceasefires are fully negotiated, monitored, and used to achieve political ends. We have argued, and we did that in Canada, when La République asked for a ceasefire, that as the party under occupation, any request for a ceasefire by the international community or the state of occupation will be used as a subject of negotiation on other issues. And we demonstrated our ability during the Canada pre-talks when Cameroon tabled the issue of ceasefire on the table. We made it absolutely clear we will put on the table release of all Amazonian prisoners, withdrawal of Cameroon forces from bases that only were set up after 2017, withdrawal to barracks, and to make sure that certain barracks are dismantled. These were starting points to accommodate a request for a ceasefire, because we were aware that while ceasefires are used as declaration of intent or a confidence building measure, it is also introduced to reduce conflict intensity and sometimes to make it difficult for fighting to restart. And sometimes it is used by parties of occupation to rearm, to gather intelligence, and to undermine the morale of the occupied to reignite resistance. We have been very clear during this conflict, during this 7-year period. Our positions have not been arbitrary. Our positions, whether on negotiations, cessation of hostility, or other issues of education, have been clearly thought out. We have looked at precedents, we have looked at case studies, but most importantly, we have studied the actors. We have studied Cameroon well. And we know Cameroon extremely very well. That they have used every method historically to undermine resistance. They have tried for the past 7 years to destroy the Monday ghost towns. They have made propositions to Amazonian groups to call off ghost towns, because ghost towns represent a humiliation of Cameroon. It represents Amazonians' collective resistance. It reminds the world that there is an ongoing war. It is a means we use to tell our people in jail that we are still in resistance. It is collective resistance to continuously conscientize Amazonians that there is an enemy in our land. Cameroon has used every method to destroy it, not because it wants to end the conflict with justice, because it wants to end the conflict with defeat. Rather than commit to international mediated talks that has credibility, Cameroon has used shortcuts, created fake commissions, fake conferences, recruited those it wants to speak to, created the DDR, where it has bribed fighters to drop their arms with the hope that they could be interlocutors for Cameroon, not Amazonia, where they could be manipulated to show the world Amazonians are tired of fighting. Rather than engage as a credible party, look at the conflict issues, resolve them in order to end the war, bring peace and justice. For 60 years, Cameroon has worked to destroy any resistance against its occupation and presence in our country. It has recruited Amazonians in their thousands, flooded our cities with these errant men and women, enablers, who have used propaganda, bribery, and corruption. The foundation of Amazonian society, which are the funds and the chiefs, has been destroyed completely through bribery, corruption, and violence. Bad faith actors, not interested in peace, not interested in justice, has only been interested in the defeat of Amazonia. You should know the solution Cameroon seeks has been the capitulation of our resistance for continuous occupation without our consent, and the continuation of regimes of impunity, deprivation, political asphyxiation for the interests of a band of individuals who have hijacked our country and even hijacked their own country. This is the basis of everything that Cameroon does, whether using social media activists, using politicians, using clergymen, using fake diplomats, using pseudo negotiation tools. Its objective is to defeat the resistance and not to resolve the conflict. My fellow people, in the past 7 years, they have, within the Amazonian struggle, removed fighters from the ground. They've recruited Amazonian activists who've turned to attack the resistance, who've attacked the credibility of our struggle. They have recruited activists who have spent months and months to attack the integrity of our struggle, denigrating our soldiers. I will talk about the role of activists. A few days ago, we read a letter from Mr. Capo Daniel Ngong, who talked about terminating the resistance in furtherance of an agenda that none of us is aware of. I take the time to talk about these issues because of the reasons I advanced before. We are all gullible because of the foundation of the occupation. You want peace, you want justice, you want the opportunity to return back to your homes, to travel, to give hope to your family. The enemy has said, you shall either have death and destruction, or you shall have peace without justice. And I understand when you are impatient. I understand when you see our setbacks and you think things are not going well. I understand when commanders fall and you feel like it's the end of the struggle, because in the 21st century of resistance, with the advent of the social media, the enemies from within can easily demoralize you. I have reminded you that if the enemy was winning, it will not need propaganda. I have reminded you, if the enemy was winning, it wouldn't need this amount of traitors to be doing their bidding. I have asked you to study conflicts, to look at key indicators that will give you a clear picture of where we are. based on where we were before. I have asked you to study the arrogance of the regime and to come to the understanding Cameroon is no blinking state. The person at the helm of Cameroon is no blinking person. And if your resistance could make them call so-called national dialogue, to reach out to the Swiss, to reach out to the Canadians, it shows very well that your resistance have had an impact. I have reminded you that more than 15 Western parliaments have discussed your case. I have reminded you that different foreign ministries have issued statements concerning your case. I have reminded you that some of the toughest parliaments in the world have issued resolutions concerning your case. I have reminded you that cases that never featured, even on social media blogs, have gone on international media. It is not because of the good faith of Cameroon. It is because of what we have done as a people. And you must continue to do what you have done in the past to bring us to this level. A few years when this gentleman resigned from the Ambazonian Governing Council, most of you were alarmed. But we had seen it coming for about a year. The cohesion of the Ambazonian Governing Council is critical, not only for the credibility of the Ambazonian resistance, but for the effectiveness of the Ambazonian leadership to continue to prosecute this war. And so while we have adopted a managerial approach to internal governance and a leadership approach to prosecuting the war, we are conscious of the times, and that without proper internal management of an organization, you will end up with splinters, you will end up with multiple centers of power that will undermine the credibility of that movement and its effectiveness in prosecuting the war. And so the absence of public rhetorics from my part, tough talking, is not because of fear. It is because of certain realities which are very much present in the body politics of the Amazonian struggle. But we know where all traitors end, in the dustbin of history. We are confident about the Amazonian Governing Council, the foundation of its existence. We are confident about the Amazonian people, their strong belief for independent homeland free from the tyranny of Cameroon. We are also confident that our continuous conversation, communication, information, and education of the Amazonian people about the mechanics and machinations, shortcuts of the enemy will help us overcome sudden bursts of surprises. And so when an individual comes up unilaterally to make statements, that individual makes it for the enemy and not for you. And those are not statements of strength. They are straight statements of weaknesses and statements of capitulation. No individual, not myself, not the Ambazonian Governing Council, no people meeting as a coalition can undermine the Ambazonian struggle for freedom. Nobody. We are conscious, we are wise, we are alert, we are woke. It is the never again generation. The enemy knows it. The enemy understands it. The enemy knows how it will end. And I ask you to continue to believe in an outcome which is certain, and to reject going back to your vomit, and to reject any individual who uses the same pain imposed by the occupier to tell you it's impossible. Because if men were landed on the moon, if you could sit where you are and watch me speak to you directly, if well-armed Ethiopian machinery backed by Russia against less than 1 million Eritreans could be humbled, if a nuclear-armed South Africa against a negligent Mkoto Wesizwe and a jailed Mandela could succumb, then nothing is impossible. Our limitations will not be used for the continuous perpetuation of a regime of death and destruction in our country. We will go through shortcomings. We will go through pain. We will have setbacks. It's a natural trajectory of history. Setbacks are used to recalibrate and to make sure you use them to build momentum and move forward, not to build momentum and move backward. All those who have attempted to betray you have betrayed themselves, have laid themselves bare. All those who were removed from the battlefield to speak against you, to tell you it was impossible, that Amazonia was not possible, that Amazonia is an illusion. Some of them have been running like nomads through deserts to find peace and glory where brave men and women once stood as warriors. We are the never again generation and we will never blink. Believe in me. Believe in the Amazonian people and the Amazonian cause. If we will ever be defeated in our life, it will not be by Cameroon, my people. It will not be by these barbarians who cannot feed themselves. It cannot be by these people that we give them asylum. It cannot be by a people who are not by themselves free from the tyranny of France. Young men below 30 years are rising up across countries in Africa, taking over governments and ushering a new dawn for their people. Monkeys and barbarians are running in the bushes of Amazonia, raping and murdering our people. This is not the people to raise the white flag. It's the people to raise the bayonet. And I ask you to continue to commit, pay your liberation tax, arm every neighborhood, and fight like you were the last person standing. I will also talk about the role of activists. Our struggle was propelled to a very stable state by activists, social media activists. They played an important part in constructing a positive narrative that empowered and emboldened our people. And we will never forget their contribution. We've always remained grateful. Activists are people who speak mostly as individuals. Their role is to make sure that they construct the narrative of the enemy. They undermine the propagation of falsehood against the Amazonian people, to uplift our people and to remind them of the obligation they have to continue to fight for freedom. The role of activists and activism in every liberation struggle, in every endeavor in the 21st century is very important. It can be abused and can be very detrimental, as we have seen in the past years in our struggle, where activists, feeling empowered, emboldened, have used their platform to formulate policies, articulate policies without measuring their consequences on the cohesion of our resistance and the integrity of our struggle. We have seen the consequences of activists legitimizing coalitions because they felt they were empowered and they had a platform and a bully puppy to do so. The consequences on our struggle has been very detrimental. I continue to remind our public speakers and activists to hold themselves with integrity and to understand the limitation of their powers. I usually speak for our people based on policies that have been discussed, chipped and rechipped, hammered, publicly tested, and implemented, adjusted based on feedback from the ground. I'm held accountable by an executive, by a movement that has elected me. Activists are not held accountable by anybody. Their decisions are personal, emotional, not tested, and the consequences do not fall on them. Activists do not run defense forces, do not bury the dead, do not take care of the widows and the orphans. These are difficult endeavors that fall on the shoulders of constituted authorities. And it is very important that Ambazonian public speakers and public activists understand that they can become instruments of constructing narratives in furtherance of the objectives of the enemy. My fellow people, we must play the different roles in our struggle. And we must know that the roles, the positions, the words we utter have consequences. And these consequences sometimes might be irreversible. And so we should conduct, and we must continuously conduct ourselves knowing fully well that 8 million Ambazonians depend on every word we say, every policies we formulate, every action we take. A few days ago, we lost General Saigon. I wrote about him today. In the past 7 years, generals have risen, and they have taken actions that have been like boosters in our continuous resistance against Cameroon. They have contributed positively in strengthening Ambazonian nationalism, in strengthening Ambazonian territorial integrity. We all watch General Saigon and General No Pity produce one of the finest actions in the history of Ambazonian resistance, when they took down with RPGs Cameroon's armored personnel carrier, killing 15 plus elite forces of Cameroon, recovering massive amount of ammunition. They turned the state of Ngokitungia into a bastion and a beacon of hope. Those actions embolden other Ambazonian fighters across the territory, who strive as much as possible to emulate what they did. Saigon has been a soldier whose activities have been remarkable in strengthening our resistance, in ensuring that the enemy is kept at bay. He was killed in action a few days ago. We honor his life, his sacrifices, and I send my condolences to his comrades, to his family. And we will continue to fight to make sure that for all of them who've lost their lives, that their sacrifices were never betrayed and that they never die in vain. My fellow people, our forces struck Nkambe early this morning. Last night, I ordered our forces in Bamenda to mount roadblocks across the city to continuously remind our people that Mondays are days we must honor, to remind our people of our obligation to the 8 million Ambazonians, to remind our people of the continuous necessity for them to commit. Our forces are active across the territory. Last week, they assaulted Kosala to make sure that the activities of the colonial mayor and the colonial DO are undermined. Across the Atlantic states, our forces have been active. In Lebialem, the vice president of the Amazonian Governing Council and the chief of staff, who are all from Lebialem, have reactivated our forces, and they are doing quite well. We must drain the swamp and make sure all those who bat for the enemy are taken out of our country. I ask each and every one of you to remain committed to the freedom of Amazonia, to remain dedicated, and to translate your hope for a free country into commitment to the Amazonian Liberation Tax. Every week, we have been raising a minimum of 2 million. It is going to go a long way to make sure we bring back the peripheral forces that were critical as frontline forces of intelligence, undermining movement of the enemy that is dedicated in attacking our core forces. I ask you not to give up on your country, not to betray your country, and not betray your country against the barbarians called Cameroon. God bless you all.
Hail this land of glory, we the Amazonians pledge our loyalty. Praise the soul of Savior who granted us the freedom. And legends to the heroes who fought along with Ayaba. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in a nation, flowing with earth and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Amazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meeting our need. And your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation. Amazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meeting our need. And your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation.
Ambazonia Defense Forces, the vanguards of the Ambazonia War of Independence. Welcome to ACN.